Well, as the race for the Conservative leadership starts to heat up, let's bring in three Conservative insiders for their views on the candidates, the issues, and the challenges. With me in our studio is Kate Harrison, a Vice President at Summa Strategies, and joining us from Toronto, our corporate communications consultant, Sara MacIntyre, former press secretary for former Prime Minister Stephen Harper and former Director of Communications for former BC Premier Christy Clark, and Jason Lietaer is President of Enterprise Canada Strategic Communication. And I'll point out that none of my guests on our panel today are working for any of the candidates, at least not to this point. And it's good to see you all.
Good to be here.
Kate, let me start with you. Let's cut right to the chase. Does Peter MacKay have this thing wrapped up? Is it a slam dunk, or does he face a legitimate and serious challenge from either Erin OToole or Marilyn Gladu?
He faces a challenge. I'm not sure where exactly it's going to come from, but I do think that there is a sense that this should not be a coronation of Peter MacKay. That's not necessarily casting judgment on his candidacy, but there are a lot of Conservatives who think that this is a contest that should be a real competition, and it shouldn't be one person's to walk away with. So I do think that Mr. MacKay is going to face a challenge, even if it's not from one clear competitor right now, though there is still time for somebody to come in. This notion that he's the leader in waiting is something that he's going to have to kind of push back against with his messaging and his tactics.
Sara, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. It's definitely Peter's to lose. And, you know, it's not really good for a party if you have a coronation during a leadership contest. You really want to expand your base, get people excited, get volunteers going, get better party lists. And if you have a coronation, it makes that a little bit more difficult. You know, he had a great launch on Saturday. His speech was one of the best speeches I've seen. It was authentic and inspiring. But where is that challenge going to come from? And, you know, what you see with Erin OToole is almost that they're going after the same kind of voter coalition, which I don't think is necessarily the smartest move by Erin, but he'll try and get some competition to Peter in Ontario, and probably with, you know, areas that have a lot of armed forces and veterans. But I don't know really what his strategy is in trying to eke away some of that support from Peter.
Let me hear you on that, Jason. Does this sound like it's going to shape up as a battle between, you know, the red Tory and the blue, maybe dark blue Tory and Erin OToole?
Yeah, this is the irony, or the weird thing here, is I think a lot of us, when it looked like there was going to be a lot broader group of people running for this thing, I think a lot of us thought maybe they would both be fishing for the same people in the same pond. I think both of them were really historically presented as, I think, red Tories for the most part in the party. And so now you've got Mr. OToole, number one, tacking west. He's launching out in Alberta today, and number two, he's I think tacking rightward. You know, I'm the blue Tory, he's the red Tory. There was some coded language in his speech today, which I thought was quite interesting. So, you know, Pierre Poilievre exits the stage. Somebody's got to fill that vacuum. Erin OToole looks like he's going to be the guy that tries to fill that vacuum in order to present a challenge to Mr. MacKay.
I mean, what's Kate, pick up on that. What's the thinking there, do you think? I mean, as I look at this, I mean, I'm thinking if you want to, it's one thing to win the leadership, but then of course you want to win an election. You want to be the Prime Minister. I mean, who's he after? I mean, when you have a message saying I'm the true blue Tory, and I'm going to defend Conservative principles and take on you know, the extremist left and so on. I mean, isn't that audience already in the Conservative tent?
It is. I think there's a couple things going on there. So I see this in the message that Erin put out today as a bit of an appeal to Conservatives who are kind of sick and tired of, you know, Trudeau's pandering to celebrities and whatnot. But more directly, it's trying to take aim at Peter MacKay's progressive Conservative legacy. So for better or for worse, I would argue for worse, but there is a contingent within the party that is always going to come back to this idea that Peter MacKay is from the PC side of the tent. He can't be trusted to be a real Conservative, or whatever that means. Clearly, there's a sentiment there that Erin OToole is trying to tap into. So there's baby steps here. You do have to run a little bit more to the right in a leadership race than you may offer up in a general.
Sara, is that a message that grows the base? Because I mean, Marilyn Gladu talked about that today, saying she believes she's the only one who can grow the base in the Conservative Party, particularly among young people. I think at one point she described Erin OToole as an old white army guy in the interview
Well,
I had with her. Well, perhaps, but I mean, what about the Erin OToole message? And does that grow the party, or just consolidate what's already there?
Well, I think where he's trying to pivot to is that populist element of the party. And, nobody in Ottawa is going to stick up for you, but I'm Erin OToole and I'm going to come in and look after the little guy. And you could see that all through his video launch. Who's going to do this for you? Who's going to do this? Who's going to do this? Well, I'm the only guy that can do that. Is it going to grow the base? Well, I mean, the only, outside of the existing populist vote within the Conservative Party, the only one you would tack towards would be potentially those vote switchers from the NDP, those union guys that want to take on, want to have that little guy voice there. So I don't think it's necessarily one that's going to grow the coalition of the Conservative support base in a general election, but it may be one that he's going to use in order to get the leadership.
Jason, Peter MacKay is taking a lot of heat, particularly in Quebec today, for his launch and his inability to do better in the French language. Is this going to be a big problem?
Well, I mean, conservative leaders doesn't speak great French is not. That hasn't been a breaking story. That's been a breaking story in plenty of different everything that I've been involved in conservative politics. It's just the same old, same old. Listen, in a general election, this will be a problem in Quebec. If you're hoping to win more than 10 seats in Quebec, which is about how many we normally win in Quebec, yeah, for sure, this is a problem. I think Mr. MacKay and his team probably aren't that happy about the headline, and the phone lines burned up to the Journal de Montréal this morning, and I understand that they're probably upset about it, but in the grand scheme of things, what I don't see is a candidate at this point that's going to appeal in Quebec more than Mr. MacKay, or I think it's a bit of a crapshoot. So that's why big time endorsements I think in Quebec will matter more. I mean, Mr. Deltel, everybody's going to be watching to see what Mr. Deltel does. Everybody's going to be watching to see what prominent Quebec Conservatives do. And I think, yeah, this is a bump. And the truth is, their French should all be better. This isn't just Mr. MacKay problem. This is all of them. And I think they're going to have to clean that up. And I think the Liberals are licking their chops for that French debate for sure. But we're not going to win a majority government in Quebec unless we have a leader from Quebec, and Mr. Charest has turned it down. So here we are.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk a little. We are continuing to talk about candidates, but let's talk a bit about the party members. Kate, you know what? One of the things, and Jason touched on it. Jean Charest is out. Ron Ambrose is out, and I think that's curious to some people because this is not a party that collapsed in the last election, that was beaten to a pulp in the last election. A lot of people thought it should and could have won the last election. So what are party members looking for?
I think party member, it's always a toss-up. You talk to some people and they say, well, it's electability in a general. My experience with political leaderships is that it's often not that. It's often who is speaking to the immediate concerns and preoccupations that members have today. And I think that Sara touched on something in terms of O'Toole's messaging, in terms of fighting for the little guy, more of that kind of populist element. Peter MacKay is Bay Street, Erin OToole is blue collar, or at least that's how he's trying to position it. I'm not sure that it's going to work, but I do think that members are looking for strong communication skills and somebody who is seen to be scrappy, seen to be a fighter and can take on Trudeau admirably. I would implore that members should be thinking also about the electability of that candidate in the general, because it's all well and good to have a rabid partisan as our leader, but can they grow the base? Can they appeal to urban and suburban Canada? To me, that is the number one question that whoever the leader is going to be needs to answer.
Right. So, Sara, was the lesson from the last election that the Conservatives had a largely, was it a policy problem or was it a leader problem?
Well, I mean, I think we should be able to see that Baird report. I think it should be released to members to look at what those lessons learned are. But all in all, I mean, we should have won that election. So I don't think it was policy. Perhaps, I mean, it's recycled policies for 10 years. I mean, the party needs to, I think to Kate's point, kind of talk about what the immediate kind of concerns are for members today, not from 2006. And, I think Mr. Scheer kind of rolled out the recycled platform from many elections past. But there was also a leader problem. He was completely shut out of Toronto, and we need to know why that was. Was it because he didn't come across as authentic when he was trying to answer questions about his citizenship, about his CV, about where he stands on social issues? So for me, my assessment of the last election and where we fell down was really, it was our leader. But you're always looking to the leader, the great messiah, to come and save the party and deliver a majority. I mean, that's what the Liberals went through, and how many leaders did they go through from McNadeff to Dion to Trudeau before he actually delivered. So right. I think that what the members need to be thinking about when they're thinking about leaders is winnability. But I don't think we should forego conservatism and having a conservative prime minister in order to be electable. There's going to be a delicate balance to find in one person.
Jason, the questions are being asked already, and Kate touched on them, so did Sara. I mean, this whole idea that we're going to have social issues being put to these leaders, they are already, where you are on same-sex marriage, where you are on a woman's right to choose. They featured prominently in the last election, possibly as a communication issue for the last leader. What role are they going to play in this leadership campaign? Because as we know, it is an internal party matter, but everybody on the outside's watching too to see where the party is on these things.
Yeah, I sure hope they play no part in this leadership campaign. And I've been involved in politics since the mid-90s, provincially and federally, and every single election campaign, it's sort of brought out and wheeled out, and there's difficult questions asked of Conservative leaders, and this kind of stuff, it's hung around us for quite some time. And I think a number of us, leaders in the party, leaders, people who have run these campaigns have decided over the last number of years, we're not going to get involved in these debates anymore. We were unsuccessful last time. Mr. Scheer, his own personal views, it's one thing to have your own personal views, it's another thing to not be able to explain them. That was the big problem that Mr. Scheer had in the last campaign, is he couldn't explain himself. And so from our side, I just won't support somebody, especially on the LGBTQ issues, who isn't open, modern, and willing to sort of say not only are gay people to be tolerated, they're to be celebrated. And so I think that's where a lot of the leadership of our party is. I don't think we're going to get into this debate again. And I think if you're a leadership candidate who's looking to get the votes required here, I think that's a non-starter going into this campaign.
But what's the right way to handle this? I mean, in my conversation with Marilyn Gladue, she's prepared to say, look, I don't want no Conservative government I lead will ever reopen that debate. That was the Stephen Harper position. That's been the Andrew Scheer position. And yet she leaves open the possibility that private members will want to bring these issues forward. And so it won't stay out of the limelight. It won't stay out of the spotlight if they want to do that. Are you saying there should be a leader that says, look, here's the deal. If I win the party leadership, these issues won't come out of caucus. I won't let you raise them. I'm shutting down that whole conversation. We've moved on. Is that on?
Yeah, well, listen, I just to answer your question, I'm sure there's other views here as well. I think that, it's the only defensible position is to actually say, private members, they're going to bring their stuff. I will whip the vote, and that will never ever get to the floor, and I will never ever support this kind of stuff. And I think honestly, most Canadians understand. Harper. I was told every single day Harper's going to reopen the women's right to choose. He's going to get rid of it. Yeah. Doug Ford, Jason Kenney, all this kind of stuff. It never happens, and I think most Canadians understand it. I think it's a construct that everybody likes to throw in our face. I think as long as you take that position, you defend it, and you look like you believe it and will enforce it, then I think that's the key.
Sara, what's your view on that?
Yeah, and I also think the candidate Dick Harrier that was out making these inflammatory, bigoted statements. I think the party and the leadership election organizing committee has an opportunity to shut the book on this once and for all and not let him run as a leader. And I think Canadians have moved on from these issues, and not just moved on. They're celebrating, as Jason says, not just tolerating, but celebrating LGBTQ rights as well as same-sex marriage. And I think if we are going to, as Peter MacKay said, get the stinking albatross away from our necks, that we need to have a leader that is very clear on these issues, that they are not going to reopen them, that perhaps if a private member brings forward an issue, they are going to whip the vote, that this is not going to be part of the Conservative Party going forward.
All right, Kate?
The challenge around this question becomes a lot easier if there is a leader who personally believes with conviction and authenticity their position on it. So I think we don't want to communicates it clearly in a way that people understand. So we don't want to send a message to social conservatives that they should go park their vote elsewhere. But at the same time, there needs to be an element of pragmatism here. And social conservatives that I speak with are tired of their political philosophy being boiled down to those two issues alone. So perhaps what we see in this debate, what I hope we see, is a thoughtful conversation on social conservative issues beyond those two. I think social conservatives have a real challenge in trying to brand their part of the movement and their political philosophy beyond that.
I'm already out of time, but I don't want to leave you without giving you 15 seconds each on this. I know that's a bit of a box to put you in, but I don't think we can leave the conversation without talking about a climate plan, and we know there was lots of conversation about that. What do you want to hear about the party's position on climate change and how it's going to deal with that in this campaign? Sara, let me start with you.
Yeah, well, I mean, I come from Sarnia, oil-producing town. My dad was a process operator, and yet, you know, we were a family that had organic recycling. I think it is a balance, and that's always been the conservative position. We need to grow the economy. We need to look after the environment, but not at the expense of the economy. And what are those specific policy platforms in contrast to what the Liberals are doing? And let's make sure that we do something that is real and measurable and effective.
Jason?
I think you can deal with it. I agree. I think a modern party needs a plan here, a credible plan. Dealing with heavy industry and dealing with transportation, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit out there. That's where we should focus our attention and draw distinctions. I think everyone understands the Liberals don't really have a plan, but they keep talking about the fact that they do. I think if you focus on a couple of measurable things, Canadians will respond.
Final word to you, Kate.
Yeah, agreed. Don't penalize everyday people just trying to get to work and do their jobs with this. Talk about the plan to transition the economy, but also let's stop with the one-size-fits-all approach to climate pricing in Canada. We need to get feedback from municipalities and provinces. I see a lot of leadership candidates going in that direction.
All right, Kate Harrison, Sara MacIntyre, Jason Lietaer. Great conversation. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Thank you.